Right. So today we're doing something a little different for our deep dive. We're not going to be, digging into like research papers or news articles or anything like that today. Instead, we are going to be cracking open a novel, and that is The Lotus Shoes by Jane Yang.
Oh, very cool.
And yeah, so what we're going to do today is basically give you kind of the sneak peek into the book. Just kind of like whet your appetite without spoiling the feast, as it were. So enough to make you curious enough to go and check out the book for yourself.
Yeah, and I think historical fiction can be such an amazing way to learn because you're experiencing history through the character's eyes. So, in this case, we're transported to 19th century China, a world that is both familiar and like utterly foreign at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, and it's even more fascinating when you think about the author herself. Jane Yang, she's a clinical researcher, believe it or not, but she grew up on stories from old China. So it's like she brings this whole other layer of authenticity to the way she portrays like this specific period.
Absolutely, and that really comes through in her writing. She has this ability to blend historical accuracy with these personal insights, which is really, I think, what brings the story to life. So are we ready to dive into some of these excerpts?
Yeah, let's do it.
We've picked out some really intriguing passages, I think, that'll give you a taste of the novel's depth.
Okay, so one thing that really jumps out at me from these excerpts is foot binding.
Oh, yeah.
It's mentioned all the time, but I think, a lot of people listening today might not really understand like what that practice meant in 19th century China, like how significant it really was.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's easy to just kind of dismiss it as this like strange custom of the past.
Right.
But foot binding was like deeply intertwined with every aspect of a woman's life back then, from social status to, beauty standards to their marriage prospects.
It's pretty wild to think about like something so basic as walking. Being deliberately restricted like that. And they even call these tiny bound feet golden lilies in the book. It almost sounds kind of poetic.
Right.
But the reality was far from it, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the novel definitely doesn't shy away from depicting the brutality of it all. Like, the pain that these girls endured to conform to this ideal of beauty that's like so distorted. And it really makes you question, how much are we willing to sacrifice for societal acceptance? And who even gets to decide what's considered beautiful?
Yeah, it's almost like the novel is holding up a mirror to our own times in a way. Because, we may not bind feet anymore, but are there like modern day pressures that kind of constrain women's choices in the same way? I don't know, it's a question that's been kind of lingering in my mind.
Absolutely. And the novel doesn't just tell us about foot binding. It shows us, like there's a passage where a mother is arguing that even poor families, they find a way to make it happen because a daughter with unbound feet basically has zero chance of marriage. So you can really see the economic and social pressure at play.
It's just heartbreaking to think that like a woman's worth was literally measured by the size of her feet. Like how did these women cope with such limited choices? Were there any who like rebelled against this practice?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. One of the excerpts mentions like a modern girl who has natural feet. So this hints at the emergence of this anti-foot binding movement.
Oh, wow.
Which shows that even within this rigid society, change was starting to like bubble up.
So it's not just a story of oppression. It's also a story of resistance.
Exactly.
I'm already curious to see how that plays out.
And speaking of resistance, there's another element that appears in the excerpts that I thought was really interesting. The muizai system.
Yeah, muizai, that word pops up all the time. But it's not something that most people are familiar with, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So basically it was this system of child servitude where like young girls would be sold to wealthy families to work as maids or servants. Imagine being separated from your family like that and essentially treated as property.
Yeah, there's a line in one of the excerpts that is really chilling. It says, a muizai belongs to her mistress, just like Little Green, even if her parents were alive. Like, it really highlights how these girls were just seen as commodities. Their lives were completely controlled by others.
Exactly. And what I found fascinating is how the novel kind of like juxtaposes the muizai system with foot binding. It's like these girls are trapped between a rock and a hard place because even if they manage to escape the brutality of foot binding, they might still end up, in a life of servitude as a muizai.
It really makes you think about the lack of agency that these women had. Were there any ways for them to like carve out their own paths?
That's something the novel explores beautifully. It doesn't just present these women as victims. It shows their strength and their resilience, even their subtle acts of defiance within a system that's trying to control them at every turn.
I'm starting to see why you're so drawn to this book. It sounds like the author has this deep empathy for these characters.
Absolutely. And the way she weaves together all these different threads, foot binding, the muizai system, the clash between tradition and modernity. It's really masterful.
I gotta say, my curiosity is definitely piqued. I can already picture these characters in my head. You know, their lives, their
I
struggles.
think that's the magic of historical fiction. It brings the past to life and makes it feel relevant to us today and
Mm.
allows us to connect with these characters on a human level.
Okay, so I want to delve a little deeper into the characters themselves now. The excerpts we have give us a glimpse of some pretty interesting relationships,
Mm.
especially between, like, the mistresses and the servants.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You have this really interesting dynamic between Little Flower, the main character, and Linjing, the daughter she serves. They come from such different worlds, and their interactions are full of tension.
Yeah, there's this one scene where Little Flower wipes her nose on her sleeve, and Lin Jing is totally disgusted by it. It's just this tiny little moment, but it speaks volumes about their cultural differences and the power dynamic between them.
It really does, and it makes you think about the complexity of their relationship. Is it purely master and servant? Or could there be something more there? Like the excerpts hint at these moments of connection, even affection, despite this social hierarchy.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if genuine friendship can even exist in these kind of unequal power structures.
Right.
And then you have Lady Fong and her maid Cerise, who are described as being true-hearted friends, almost like sisters.
Yeah,
It's such a contrast to the relationship between Little Flower and Lin Jing.
absolutely.
And it makes you think about, the nature of intimacy and loyalty. Like, can true friendship really exist between a mistress and a servant, or is there always this element of power imbalance?
Yeah, such a good question.
It seems like there's so much nuance to these relationships.
Hmm.
It's not just black and white,
Yeah.
good versus evil. It's about real people trying to figure things out in a really complex social structure.
I think you hit the nail on the head. And that complexity extends beyond just like individual relationships. Because the excerpts also hint at this larger tension in society, this clash between tradition and modernity.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We see it in Lin Jing's family, where her father wants her to marry this Westerner who is totally opposed to foot binding, much to her mother's dismay, of course.
Of course.
It's like this microcosm of China's struggle to reconcile its past with this, like, growing influence of the West.
Yeah, and it just adds another layer of intrigue to the story. How are these characters going to deal with these conflicting values? Will they cling to tradition, embrace change, or find some entirely new path?
This novel is touching on so many fascinating themes: social hierarchy, cultural clashes, female agency, the power of human connection. It's more than just a story. It's like this window into this really pivotal moment in Chinese history.
It really is, and we've only just scratched the surface. We haven't even talked about like the darker elements that are hinted at in the excerpts.
Oh yeah, like what?
Things like sing-song houses, kidnappings, the sense of danger lurking beneath the surface.
Ooh, that's interesting.
It's like this beautifully crafted tapestry, woven with threads of beauty and brutality and resilience and mystery. You just want to unravel every layer and see how it all comes together.
Well, I am definitely intrigued, and I think that's a perfect place to leave it for now. So for all you listeners out there, if you want to find out what happens next, you're going to have to tune in to part 2 of our deep dive into the Lotus Shoes.
We've talked a lot about these bigger issues, like societal expectations and cultural clashes and all that. But what I think really draws you into a book like The Lotus Shoes are the little stories, like those intimate moments where you get a glimpse into the characters' inner lives.
Yeah, that's so true. There's one part that really stuck with me, where Little Flower is talking about how she finds comfort in embroidery. She says, "With each satin stitch, I retreated further and further into a realm where nothing mattered." It's like her needle is this magic wand that helps her escape from the reality of her life.
It's such a beautiful image, right? And it makes you think about the power of art as a form of escape, like how people throughout history have used creativity to find beauty and meaning in the midst of suffering.
Totally. And it's not just Little Flower. The excerpts kind of suggest that even Lin Jing, who seems to have this more privileged life, she finds solace in her own way. It mentions her being fascinated with Western novels, like she's yearning for something different.
That's interesting.
It's like both of them are looking for an escape, but through completely different means. Do their paths ever cross? Do they find any common ground in that desire for something more?
That's the question that keeps you turning the pages. And speaking of escape, the excerpts hint at a darker, more dangerous form of escape as well.
You mean the sing-song houses?
Yeah.
That was one of the things that really stood out to me. It's like this shadowy undercurrent running through the story.
Exactly. The sing-song houses represent this world of allure and danger, a place where girls like Little Flower might seek refuge, or be forced into exploitation, it adds this element of suspense, like anything could happen.
There's this one scene where Little Flower mentions wanting to run away, but her friend Spring Rain warns her about how dangerous it is. Kidnappings, beggar tribes, even the possibility of mutilation. It's a pretty stark reminder of how vulnerable these girls were.
It really highlights the reality of life outside of, family or social standing. It makes you think about what choices these girls even had when the world seems stacked against them.
And then there's this mysterious character, Miss Hart, the Westerner. She tells Little Flower, I could save you too. It's just this little line, but it leaves you hanging. You want to know more.
Right. Who is Miss Hart? What are her motives? Is she really offering salvation, or is there something else going on? The excerpts just give us these little glimpses, so we're left to wonder what her role is in Little Flower's life.
It's like the author is dropping these little breadcrumbs of mystery to draw us in. And it's not just the plot that keeps you hooked. There's this spiritual element woven throughout the novel, too. It adds this whole other layer of depth.
Absolutely. The excerpts mention things like the Shrine of Jiutlu, the deity of marriage, and Sungzi Gunjam, a goddess associated with fertility. And these beliefs aren't just like abstract ideas, they're deeply ingrained in the characters' lives. They shape their hopes and fears.
It's fascinating to see how spirituality is so tangible in their daily lives. There's that scene where Little Flower goes to the temple to pray for her mother. It's this really poignant moment. You see her vulnerability, her longing for connection.
It's a powerful scene, and it shows how important faith and ritual were in a world where so much felt uncertain. These practices offered a sense of order, a way to make sense of the chaos and hardship.
It makes you think about how universal the search for meaning is, no matter what time period you're in. I'd love to learn more about these specific deities and their role in Chinese culture.
And that's one of the things I love about the Lotus Shoes. It's not just a good story. It's like this portal into a whole different culture, a different way of life.
Yeah.
You're invited to learn and explore right alongside the characters.
We've been talking about some pretty heavy stuff. Foot binding, the muizai system, all those hints of danger. But it's important to remember that there are also moments of hope, of resilience, of human connection.
Oh, absolutely. We see it in Little Flower's determination. Spring Rain's dreams for the future, even Lady Fong's genuine affection for Cerise. They might be bound by societal constraints, but their spirits are strong.
And those moments of connection, the little acts of kindness and compassion, that's what makes the story resonate. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, people find ways to support each other, to offer comfort and hope.
And it makes you root for them. You want to see them overcome these obstacles and find happiness.
It's like you're right there with them on the journey, experiencing the highs and lows, the good and the bad. And you can't help but wonder where it will all lead.
That's the mark of a really good story. It keeps you guessing, keeps you engaged, and leaves you with a sense of wonder long after you've finished reading.
Okay, so before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, I want to step back for a minute and think about the historical context a little more. We know the story takes place in 19th century China, a time of huge change and upheaval.
Yeah, China was dealing with internal conflicts and growing pressure from the West. It was a period of modernization, but also resistance, where traditional values clashed with new ideas.
And that tension is reflected in the novel, right?
Yeah.
We see it in the debates about foot binding, the influence of Western culture, even the characters' own personal struggles.
For sure. The novel doesn't shy away from showing the complexities of this era. It's a society that's in transition, caught between its past and an uncertain future.
And that just adds another layer of meaning to the story. It's not just about the individual characters. It's about a whole nation trying to find its place in a world that's changing so rapidly.
It really makes you think about how history shapes our lives, how these big forces can influence us in ways we might not even realize.
And it makes you appreciate the courage of the people who lived through those times. Imagine navigating all those societal shifts, the cultural clashes, the personal dilemmas. It must have been so challenging.
And that's why stories like The Lotus Shoes are so important. They offer us a glimpse into the lives of those who came before us. We connect with their experiences, maybe even learn from their struggles.
It reminds us that history isn't just dates and facts. It's about real people, their hopes and fears, their triumphs and tragedy.
Exactly. And by learning about their stories, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, our world, the shared human experience.
We've covered so much ground already, the historical background, those cultural clashes, the spiritual side of things. But there's one thing that keeps coming back to me, and that's the way that The Lotus Shoes portrays female relationships. It's something special.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one of the most fascinating parts of the book, for sure. The way the relationships between women are portrayed is just so complex and multifaceted. It goes way beyond those like societal roles and expectations.
Totally. Like we see the competition and the jealousy and even some manipulation between these women, but then we also see these moments of like really deep connection and empathy and even love. It's like the novel is showing us this whole range of human experiences, but through the lives of these women.
Yeah. And it's even more powerful when you think about how restrictive their society was.
Hmm.
Their choices were so limited, their movements were controlled, and their voices were often silenced. But within those constraints, they found ways to connect with each other, to forge these bonds that kind of defied the system.
Yeah, there's this one excerpt that I can't get out of my head. Lady Fong is giving advice to Lin Jing about how to manage her future household, and she says, "It is not enough to have the title. You must also find ways to remind your sister wives that you are the principal wife." It sends chills down my spine.
I know, right? It's like this harsh reminder of the power dynamics that existed even within the home. It wasn't just about getting attention or affection. It was about survival,
Mm.
security, finding your place in a system that was basically designed to turn women against each other.
It really makes you think about what it must have been like psychologically to live like that, to constantly be navigating those power struggles. How do you even maintain your sense of self, your own desires?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And yet, even in the midst of all that competition, the book shows these moments of genuine solidarity between women, too. Like, think about the friendship between Little Flower and Spring Rain. They support each other, they share their dreams, and they offer comfort when things get tough.
It's like this beautiful reminder that even in the darkest situations, human connection finds a way. It makes you wonder, can you really have true sisterhood in a society that tells women to see each other as rivals?
It's a question that the novel really grapples with, and I think that's what makes it so interesting. It doesn't give you easy answers, but it makes you confront these complicated truths about female relationships within a patriarchal society.
I think it also makes you appreciate how strong and resilient these women were. They might not have had the freedom to make their own choices, but they still found ways to make their voices heard, to carve out their own little spaces, to find meaning and connection, even when the world was trying to hold them back.
Absolutely, and I think that's the heart of the Lotus Shoes. It's a story about the human spirit's ability to persevere, to find love and hope and connection, even in the face of incredible adversity.
It's also a reminder that history isn't just about big events and famous people. It's about the lives of everyday people, their struggles, their triumphs, their relationships. And when we explore those stories, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, our world, and just how connected we all are.
I couldn't agree more. And the Lotus Shoes is just such a brilliant example of storytelling. It blends history and culture and these personal narratives into this amazing tapestry that's both beautiful and heartbreaking. It pulls you in and makes you think.
You've definitely convinced me. The Lotus Shoes is going straight on my reading list.
I think you'll really enjoy it. It's a story that will stay with you.
Well, that's what we hope for. We always want to inspire you to dig a little deeper into these topics. And I think the Lotus Shoes is the perfect jumping off point. So thank you for joining us for this deep dive. And until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep those minds open.
And don't forget to keep reading.